Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week, I read Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. Released in 1937, this is another fictional murder mystery located within the Hercule Poirot universe. I think I said the name wrong in my episode of Murder on the Orient Express, but it's Detective Hercule Poirot, I'm pretty sure. So this is another book that's like centered within that realm of mysteries. And it revolves around a crime where Detective Poirot finds himself in the center of the investigation, like always. Now, for background information, this is written by Agatha Christie, who is a legend and who has released plenty of pieces that are still very relevant, including this one, obviously, as there is a very recent film adaptation. But if you don't know who Agatha Christie is, I think I've also said this before, she's probably your favorite author's favorite author. So she's someone who specializes in this type of detective fiction books, and she does it very well, actually. Another reason we're still reading her books almost a century later. But for more information, certainly go back and listen to my episode on Murder on the Orient Express, and that gives you a little more background. Now, this book is 31 chapters long, and it is 333 pages. It is set primarily within Egypt on the Nile River, if that wasn't already obvious by the title, and presumably in the year 1937 when the book was released. Now, there are various characters that we are introduced to. In the beginning, they are all in their respective locations. So for a little bit of the book, maybe like 5-10% of the book, we're jumping from character to character, but also from different location to location until they all eventually meet in one area. Now, this book is written in a third-person perspective, and the audience falls into the story without introduction. So we're not really understanding, especially with all of the characters that are mentioned in the first chapter, we don't know what's going on, but we're just kind of thrust into the world. Like I said, it follows various characters that are all introduced within chapter 1. And these segments within the chapter are separated by Roman numerals. So you can kind of infer that when there's another section, because it only happens a few times in the book, when there's another numbered section by Roman numerals, that we're following a different character or we're observing a different situation. Now, within this, though, the audience can deduce motives and connections. Because we don't know what's going on, we're engaged right from the start because nothing seemingly makes sense. So I found myself kind of latching on to certain details that were mentioned about characters that we may have gotten 2 paragraphs on in the beginning, because I was like, okay, how is this relevant to the story? So right from the beginning, you're confused, but you're engaged. Now, also, be sure to break out the Google Translate feature within Google, because there are a few French phrases that are spoken primarily by Poirot, and it's not necessarily like the phrases aren't super relevant, but I mean, it's nice to kind of know what he's saying sometimes, and it does kind of give you like a hint as to who a character truly is, just by him uttering a phrase or a saying in French. So I had that up on my screen, and I was just going back and forth just to, see what he was saying under his breath. Now, in addition, I would say the term to describe Christie's writing style is speculative as well as suggestive. And that's primarily coming from like a reader's point of view, knowing who Agatha Christie is and understanding her work and what she has done and how many of these novels she has written, it's my understanding that any and everything is a clue. So you often find yourself zoning in on different dialogue that is seemingly suggestive. And it sounds like there's something more to be said. And so I really love this aspect about it. I think it had a lot to do with building the suspense and the tension within the book. Even, and this is kind of strange, but even reading this book, like, I was so aware of my surroundings that I was kind of like scared, because it's when you're kind of like when you're watching a scary movie and you're so into it, and then you hear like a noise and you're like, oh my god, what is that? That's kind of how it was with this book. So that's how much tension she's able to maintain within the reader, just from a lack of information or suggesting that there's more than what the eye can see. A lot of the confessions that we receive are elicited from monologues that our beloved detective, is kind of famous for at this point. He has a way with almost accusing people of doing something and kind of giving every justification as to why they would try to go along with this crime, or do whatever. And mainly it's for them to come out and deny it and say what they really did. So he's good at pulling confessions by suggesting that someone had something to do with a murder or, whatever other heinous crime he's investigating. Now, in this, of course, everyone's standout qualities are highlighted. And not even just like if it's a good or a bad quality, even if it's something odd about the person. Like maybe this person dresses strangely. Well, that's your indication that they are not who they say they are. And then lastly, the character connections are elusively stated. Now, going into reading this book, I also kind of operate under the assumption that all of the characters that are introduced have some type of connection to each other. And that's probably like really rich to assume that everyone, was in on something. But somehow, some way, they either all know each other or there's one singular thing pulling them together, because why else are we reading about them? And she's good at kind of hinting at maybe, this is this person's cousin, or this person went to school in this city and this person grew up there, or something like that. So the clues are there. You just kind of have to put them together. And that's where you can read the book with an understanding that someone is lying. So paying attention to how Christie reveals details is very important when it comes to uncovering the truth for yourself. A lot of times though, you're wrong. So I never really like pinpointed anyone that could have been responsible for the crime, because in my mind, everyone was sketchy. But after reading a few of these like fiction thriller pieces back to back, I'm just like in the mind state that everybody's guilty. So it's pretty funny that but you know what? Also, I feel like the characters are written that way. They're written with some level of deception, whether it's the highest form of deception, which is they're involved in the crime that is centralized to this plot, or they're just sketchy people. And funnily enough, we're going to talk about the different character types. So typically with fiction books, I pinpoint all of the main characters or all of the important, impactful characters and talk about their traits. However, I have kind of zoned in on the types of characters that are involved in Christie's books typically. So first we have the good guys. This is the first kind of grouping that I have here, which includes someone who is very intelligent and who is most importantly perceptive. So what happens is they're able to, or they intentionally sit back and watch, and they understand the entire picture, whereas everyone else is only seeing one side of the story or of the crime. This person is the one that puts all of the pieces in place in the puzzle, and that's typically our detective, Hercule Poirot. Now, there's usually a second most intelligent person, but helpful all the same. And this is kind of our detective sidekick throughout the book, someone who we can seemingly trust, and seemingly, again, is on the side of justice. I say that because I just am under the assumption that everyone has a secret and everyone's shady. So at times, I was questioning if we really even should trust the detective, because if you really think about it, first of all, why are there so many books with this detective? I know it's his job to solve crimes, but if you really think about it, only bad stuff happens when he's around. So, but in this book, he's the good guy. So now our second grouping are the suspects. And these are two types of suspects that typically they all kind of fall into one or the other. They're either greed driven, which this usually is classified by blatant attempts in the past that showcase their greed, whether they, stole in the past, or they're displayed and described as someone who is very flamboyant with the wealth that they do have. Or we have characters who are emotionally driven, and these are typically characters that are very internally conflicted or surrounded by scandal. So these are the characters that they're in the suspect pool because they're clearly going through something, like something's happening. And so for them, they're at a very low point. And when a crime happens, it's easy to look at them and say, well, they're already kind of broken mentally. They have to be at the center of this. Whereas the greed-driven suspects, it's just like they're out for money or, whatever may have you. And so it's obvious that they could also be suspects. And the third group are the Shady Loners. So these are the people that, like, something's off. And they're odd, or they just don't fit in with the rest of the collective. And so they're considered a suspect at one point, or they are the go-to scapegoat, whether by the entire group or, from what we find out later, by the person who actually committed the crime. And this is because they're easy to blame, So these are usually the characters that are off in the background, that kind of keep to themselves. And we find out usually at the end that they're innocent of the crime that is currently being investigated, but they're still shady, or they're involved in some other wild stuff. They just haven't had anything to do with the matter at hand. So it's not that they're good people, they just weren't mixed up in this situation. And I also wanted to point out that usually we find books entertaining because the characters are dynamic, which are characters that change throughout the book, change in reaction to the plot or other characters. There aren't any dynamic characters here, and the reason for it is because they only just uncovered what happened, and usually they don't come to the conclusion of the entire plot until the end of the book. And so there's no room really to see the growth of the characters. And so in this, we find that people aren't learning from their mistakes right now, whether because the time frame is too short or because they're truly just static characters that are sticking within their greed, or they're sticking within their shadiness, or even their good guy persona. So with that being said, the primary theme here is envy, whether for love, for wealth, or for status. We see all three of those in this book. And this is usually revealed through the character reactions to fortuitous events. So if you have a character that has very good luck, or someone who is constantly coming into good things and good events, the reaction of the other characters usually indicates some level of envy or friendship or whatever may have you. But if you have a character who is consistently frowning or sad, especially during times of high points for other characters, usually that person is envious on some level. This is also, the envy is revealed through descriptive character traits or expressions. So again, if Christie is constantly talking about how a character never looks happy, that's kind of a red flag. And lastly, we find that envy is revealed through background events that are discussed in the present time. And this usually comes with the process of the investigation, uncovering different past events that may have influenced our current characters to act out a certain way. A lot of the characters, though, it's kind of funny. I feel like envy is not a great word because it does have a really negative connotation. But I think we have to also acknowledge that part of envy is like being obsessed with someone and loving this person or just wanting what they have. So it's not all bad, but I think Drake summed it up very well. He said, "Jealousy is just love and hate at the same time." And that's a lyric from I think 2011 or something. But I always think of it because it's true. There's two sides to really envying someone. You hate them because they have what you don't have, but you also love them and kind of idolize them. So a lot of these characters represented that very well, I think. And the last theme here we have is class, and we're referring to specifically the socioeconomic standing of our characters. So socially, the standings of our characters are dictated by who they are in society and thus who they can interact with. So for example, Lynette Ridgway is the center of gossip mainly because of her inheritance. So everyone knows that she's coming into money. She has a family that, has a good amount of wealth. Therefore, she's something to talk about. Whereas Marie Van Schuyler refuses to connect or talk or speak with people that she deems are below her. And then also we have the literal sense of you can see the physical separation of social groups, even on the boat. Obviously the servants and the workers of the boat, they don't, I'm so sick of these cars with I don't know what they do to modify these cars, but they sound terrible. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, so the workers on the boat obviously don't live and dwell on the same floor, I don't think, as, the paying customers. But when we start looking at murder suspects and things like that, you have to take into account that everyone is not always interacting because of the different class standings. So people have to go to sleep on different levels of the boat, so there's logistics involved in that. But basically just keeping in mind that there is this unwritten but very strict class guidelines that are either followed explicitly or just in the people that you talk to or choose to talk to on a day-to-day basis. And with wealth, this is pretty, obvious. It influences the decisions of our suspects for sure. And this similarly invokes envy. Now, we have it kind of good with Christie's descriptive writing because a lot of the times the wealth of a character is visible through their clothing or their possessions or how they carry themselves, sometimes their posture. And what we can derive from that is either a person is trying to be someone they're not, in a different class, or they are truly they dress like they're from this other place or somewhere else. So we see all of this through the writing that Christie does, and we're able to deduce, much like our detective, where a person stands and what they stand to gain in said crime. Okay, so my review, honestly, I've already said this, but it was very suspenseful. I think that Christie's strongest writing skill, her strongest writing characteristic, is that she's able to maintain the reader's engagement. And even speaking on a lot of authors from today have not maintained this. You know, they don't know how to capture a reader's attention, or they do the thing where they write as if, in terms of a thriller, they write as if one person is responsible for the crime and then there's this big twist at the end. Whereas Christie has a rotating schedule of suspects, and oftentimes it turns out that more than one person is involved, which also makes the conclusion that much more gratifying, because who would really think of that? Like, who could put together, of all the characters in this book, who's connected to who wants what? And a lot of times it's not open and shut. Like I said with our third group of characters, the Shady group, sometimes they're not implicitly involved in the main crime, but they have something on the side going on that inadvertently contributed to the death of so-and-so. So I think, obviously, you know, Christie's a legend for this, but this, even now, her work is miles ahead of most of us writers. And with that, there's like this aura of expectancy that follows the detective. And so it's funny because the way that he speaks as if, one, he already knows what has happened, but he's trying to prove it to everyone else. And so trying to follow him, it's very difficult because you already don't know what's going on. You're already not aware of most of, you know, the connections in the background of the characters within the story. And so it's just, you know that he's got it, you know he's on it, but you just kind of have to wait until literally like the last chapter to find out what happened. So very good, very, very good. And it's funny because even with that promise that the detective is going to solve this, because we kind of expect that at this point, it's still very entertaining. You know he's going to get the job done. And I think it's similar to like the fanfare around crime shows. Even thinking back to like Scooby-Doo, when I was younger, I watched that show all the time. And when you think about it, every episode kind of followed the same plot structure, but we still tuned in to watch it. So it's very similar to that. And I'm sure Christie inspired, you know, the likes of Scooby-Doo, even like inadvertently. But yeah, I completely understand why there are so many books surrounding this particular detective, because he's an interesting character, almost akin to Sherlock Holmes, but he's not, you know, as much of a jerk about it. So is this a reread? Yes. And this is one of those books that I think the second read is going to be a unique experience as well, because you now know the truth. So now you get to see all of those little details that you paid no mind to before. You get to see them, you know, rolling into place. So I certainly think that books like these are definite rereads. So I will keep this on my shelf. Now the film adaptation, Lord have mercy. Okay, it's 2 hours long. It was recently released in theaters, and Hulu currently has it streaming. I think they started like last week, so it'll probably be up there for a few months or so. Let me tell you something. Bad. And it's bad because they did not follow Christie's formula. So I guess you could say if there wasn't a book on it and this movie was just made, you know, as a standalone film, it's fine. It's a cool, you know, thriller. But in my opinion, the suspense that I had from a book, you know, even just like my nerves were kind of shot reading this book that was written in 1937, that I didn't feel that at all in the movie. Like, I mean, yeah, we knew someone was going to die and whatnot, but like, I think it's because, one, they centered the story around the detective. So I think they did that as well for the Murder on the Orient Express, and I'm assuming that's probably like a a thing that the whatchamacallit, the production company, what am I thinking? Whoever's producing the film, I think that's probably intentional. In my opinion, though, oh my gosh, it's raining again. It did this last week, right as I started my review. It started raining. I'm sorry for the noise and the absent-mindedness. But in my opinion, the third person is more effective because you get those pieces of information about people and the connections that they have, which don't make sense yet. And then you're forced to kind of like put them together and put them into perspective. Whereas just following the detective, it's like, I don't know, there's something missing. And I think that definitely contributes to it. But also they cut out some characters, which I kind of understand because, again, there are a lot of characters within this book. And some of them don't really matter that much, but some of them do. And you can't really cut out any without affecting the plot. And so what they did was they combined some of the character traits into the few that they had in the movie, which was, I mean, it was okay, but it did take away from the overall story. Because let's just say, for instance, we're looking at 15 characters that all have a hand in this crime, and you're condensing it to like maybe 5 main characters. I don't know, it took away of the tension for me. So it wasn't that great. I mean, and they changed some like character traits of the characters that they did include as well. So I don't know. I don't want to sound like a book snob and say that the book is always better, but it's like lately when it comes to these fiction standalone pieces, who is doing these books justice? Because it sucks. And it's crazy because you could literally take this book and just change it into a script, just format it differently. I feel like Christie has the perfect formula and algorithm to maintaining her readers' attention, as well as, suggesting that there's something off with this whole situation, this whole scenario. So I don't know how they messed that up, but I did not like it. I didn't like it. Some of the actors were like, I didn't really like them in the role, so that could be it as well. But it wasn't very great to me. I'm probably not going to watch it again. I won't be watching it again. It wasn't good. So, but as always, I encourage you to watch the movie after you read the book and see how you liked it. But I don't think it did the book justice at all. Which is funny because I enjoyed Murder on the Orient Express. I thought it was, okay. It wasn't better than the book, but it was certainly better than this film. Anyway, I do have one takeaway here, and that is all that glitters isn't gold. However, if you do have gold, you will forever be aware of other people's envy. Which sucks, but, just be mindful that everyone around you is not going to benefit you, and some are actually going to be detrimental to your success and your well-being, unfortunately. With that being said, update, I binged Bridgerton season 2. It was fantastic. See, you know what? That is a series that does the book justice. It does. And they changed a lot. And maybe it has to do, again, with having a series versus a film. Because even though the storyline wasn't the same at all in the book, I enjoyed it. It was a well-made series. Did I think it was better than the book? I actually kind of do. But I also didn't really like the book. So, I may be biased. But yeah, so Bridgerton series season 2 was very good. It was based on The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. So definitely go look at that review. I released that last week. And next week, I think we're finally going to get out of the fiction pieces. So I will be reviewing a nonfiction piece next week. But anyway, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope everyone has a great weekend, and I will see you next week. Thanks.